Welcome to this video. My name is Vivek and I'll be showing you how I prepare my painting palette for an oil painting session. So I'm simply using linseed oil as my choice of medium. This is the Rowney brand, the purified linseed oil. I'm also using the Rowney Georgian paints, which are fabulous, and I like them because they come in such a huge variety, similar to the Winton range, but the tubes are slightly bigger too. I believe these are 225 ml. You can see that I'm mixing the paints on my grey palette, which is simply two glass table mats put side by side, and underneath that is a grey bit of card which keeps the colours from showing their true value, so you can see the actual saturation of those colours instead of having a blank white or black surface. So I like to mix my paints in quite thoroughly. I do like a beautiful creamy consistency, so it slaps straight onto the canvas and there's no stiffness from the paint straight from the tube. However, if I am going to be using a palette knife, I will most likely use the paint straight from the tube because it allows for that impasto thick heavy texture look. But today's painting session was basically a brush stroke painting with a paintbrush, so there was no need to take the paint straight from the tube, which is this video, which is I'm showing you how I mix the colours so it becomes nice and fluid. You can see that I'm mixing in the yellow. This is a beautiful cadmium yellow. I like to use the cad yellow and red and orange. Yellow takes quite a lot more oil, I've discovered. I don't know if that's just the Georgian range, but it does take a lot more oil. Maybe it's very high pigmented, but I don't use a lot of oil in my paintings. The cadmium yellow, sorry. I find that it's a very rare colour I use across my paintings unless I'm painting fruit or fruit trees, and at the moment I've been doing a lot of that, so it's very hit and miss with how much yellow I use. I like to use a palette knife to mix in the paints. It's the best thing, and artists have been using that for years, so it just incorporates the oil very well with the paint pigment, so it's brilliant for just working in the paint. I like to keep a glob of grey, which is simply the muddy colours from the previous painting session. I find that it's useful for going over your painting. If you ever need a bit of grey, you've always got some. It's just residual oil paint from the previous session. Really super handy. That little tub over there is where I keep my linseed oil. I use that to dip my brush in sometimes, but I find that when I'm painting very quickly, which is how I like to paint, there's no need to dip my brush in so many times. And if I do, the extra pigment just settles at the bottom, like typical oil painters would tell you. It just sits at the bottom and you've got fresh linseed oil at the top. And that's what I'm using to decant the linseed oil straight onto my palette. Otherwise, I like to keep a bottle of the paint, bottle of the oil close by, so I can just add that in whenever I need to. I find that burnt sienna is such a beautiful colour, and I use that instead of a burnt umber because there's a nice richness of red to your burnt sienna, which is the colour slap bang in the middle. Underneath that you've got the ivory black. I prefer using lamp black because it makes my paintings less muddy. There's a lot of blending going on in my paintings, so I find that when I use lamp black there's less of that muddiness. Orange I don't really use that much, and again, unless orange is the main colour of the painting, there's no need to pour out orange paint. I find that it's very Again, very rarely used, like the yellow, for me anyway. I've got to have cerulean blue. I think it's such a fabulous blue, and I love mixing this with the cobalt violet, which is on the opposite side of that blue. It just produces such a beautiful saturated and glowy purple. You can see it takes quite a while for the paints to incorporate. I don't think that's a bad thing. I find that on warmer days that the paint does become more stiff, and I'm having to remove the excess with a palette knife, scraping off those layers of dried oil paint, which is why I like to keep the palette clean. Otherwise you can start your painting session preparing the paints just scraping away at the palette, which is super annoying. And remember to keep wiping your palette knife to remove the residual oil paint from the previous colour. Sometimes for black I just like to mix the burnt sienna with a bit of hooker's green and the blue. It just produces such a beautiful greyish black, which can look quite nice in some paintings. Sometimes I'll prefer a permanent black. So I haven't discussed what blue I've got there. That's a permanent blue, and the purple colour next to it is a cobalt violet, and on the other side of that is my ivory black, and then I've got viridian or phthalo green. Beautiful colours. Not being sponsored by Georgian Oil Paints. I wish I was though, that would be great. Keeping my hand well away from the palette, I try not to get paint on my hands. I find that it does irritate my skin quite a bit, so I've got the trusted glove on. So I really like to incorporate these early on because it saves you from having to decant more paint out of the tube and working it in with the oil. I find that if you do this right at the start, you tend to save yourself quite a lot of time, and it stops you from ruining your flow. And that's how you do it. That's my painting palette.